Hello everybody, welcome back to MVP. I'm your host Vaughan, and today we're doing something slightly different. Now in college I take psychology, biology and chemistry, right? And if you're thinking about going into those three in college, I'd recommend not. They can be quite boring. But today they're not going to be boring because I'm actually using them for the first time ever. So have you ever picked up your guitar after a while of not using it, and go to play something specific and your fingers can just do it without you having to think about it up here? That's muscle memory, or so we call it. The thing is, the muscles don't remember anything. It's all happening up here. So let's break down this incredible process and how it works. Now, muscle memory is a very casual term, but scientifically it's something called a procedural memory, which is a type of long-term memory that stores the involuntary mechanical movements, like riding a bike, or if I can think of another example, producing speech, where you can do it, but you can't exactly explain how you can do it, you just do it. But if we relate this to music, we have two types. We have declarative and we have procedural. Your declarative is your straight facts, your semantic memory, so that's, oh, C major has no sharps or flat in it, or this mode looks like this. Whereas procedural memory, as I mentioned, is just doing things without thinking about it. So when we say our hands have remembered a riff, our brain's just remembering the motor sequence, the mechanical movement of our hands, so efficiently that it can practically run on autopilot. Now, localization. What is localization? Localization of the brain is the idea that certain actions that we do and behaviours that we exhibit come from the activity of specific parts in our brain. So there's stuff like the Broca's area, Wernicke's area, or Wernicke's area, however you pronounce that. But the part that we're interested in is some of the cortexes. So you have some main cortexes, you have your auditory, you have your visual, you have your somatosensory, and you have your motor cortex, which is what we want to focus on. The motor cortex is responsible for movement, and it's located in the prefrontal cortex. Think of it as the centre that sends the precise electrical movements down your central nervous system and your spinal cords to actually spinal cords? You don't have multiple spinal cords, but it sends you specific electronic impulses to your fingers to move them back and forth. Every time you play a note, there's a massive amount of activity that goes up in the motor cortex. And the significant amount of energy that's expended is used for the timing, for what force you need to use, and where you need to actually play. And the more you do this, the more your brain is like, okay, we know how to do this, so we don't need to relearn everything that we're doing. So it starts running on autopilot and uses less energy. This is why when you learn a new song, it's not like relearning how to play the guitar, because your brain knows, oh, I need to do this amount of force to make this note, and I need to do this, and blah, 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 blah. Now, next up is the cerebellum, which is like the fine tuner. It continuously compares what you're playing with what you want it to sound like, and it makes small little corrections to fix it. This is called error feedback. This means that we need to practice slow and accurate, because if we train our brain to play sloppy, then that's going to be ingrained in our cerebellum, and we're always going to play sloppy unless we fix it, which will take more and more effort the more and more sloppy we play. Obviously. Now finally, the basal ganglia. I hope I'm not losing you yet. Deep inside the brain, these movements that we're undergoing to actually make this music becomes a habit, and it no longer requires that much energy to do, because we can just do it, and we don't have to learn how to do it every time we play it. Now that we've formed these habits, how do we keep them? That's through things called conditioning. So there's a behavioural psychologist, his name was Pavlov. You might have heard of Pavlov's dogs, that's hard to say. And he wanted to cause a salivation response in dogs. So whenever he brought them food, he'd ring a bell. And so the dogs realised that every time he rung the bell, food would show up, so they'd start salivating at the sound of the bell. Similar to this, there's a guy called Skinner, who developed operant conditioning. And he had rats in boxes. And as you'd know, with reward and punishment, he would give the rats food every time they hit a specific lever, which demonstrates positive reinforcement. And then in reverse of this, you have negative reinforcement, which is the rats had to escape a negative situation by pulling the lever. So Skinner did this by flashing lights and loud noises and even an electrified floor. I know, pretty damn evil, but it worked out in the end. Which brings up an interesting point. Is it ethical for science? Let me know what you think down below. Now, back to the brain. Our brain works in the same way because it undergoes something called dopamine signaling. You've heard of dopamine, the neurotransmitter that makes you happy. We're reinforcing these patterns that we're undergoing by giving you dopamine every time you get it right, which means you're more likely to get it right in the future. Much like when we teach AI. But how do we change our brain to account for these changes? It's actually something called neuroplasticity, which is very, very cool because it literally rewires the structure of your brain. So yes, your hobbies literally change how your brain is structured. Remember that when you're playing with the joystick. Our brain, as you might know, is made up of something called neurons, which shoot something called action potentials, or electrical signals. Every time we repeat an action, these electrical signals fire between each neuron, and when they fire together, they form something called a connection, or like a bridge, which is known as Hebb's rule. The more you complete a task, the more of these small bridges form, and they get stronger and they get bigger. And the neurons undergo a process called myelination, which makes the signal speed even faster. Think of this as like changing your crappy copper wires in your computer for high-speed fiber optic fiber optic cables. For high-speed fiber optic cables. There we go. So in summary, learning something for the first time requires a lot amount of energy for the motor cortex to function. But the more you do it, the less energy is needed. And as you train, you're not just training your fingers, but you're making your brain work and change its shape to do it more effortlessly. I'm really struggling with talking today. But that is the power of neuroscience. Pretty cool, right? But anyways, that's enough from me. So always buy a glass house and throw stones at people walking by. And I'll see you in the next one.
Bye bye.